The first person who told me I'd abandoned my parents wasn't my mother. It was a woman named Linda from their church, which was interesting, because Linda had seen me in the Walgreens parking lot at least twice a month for 6 years. She called me on a Tuesday morning while I was sitting in my truck outside a commercial HVAC job site in Tulsa, waiting for a technician to tell me whether a rooftop unit needed a compressor or an exorcism. I manage operations for a heating and air company, so my entire workday is basically schedules, service records, invoices, missed appointments, and people insisting they definitely called when I can see on the screen that they absolutely did not. Linda said, "Leah, I hope you don't mind me reaching out, but your mom is really struggling." I thought she meant physically. My dad had diabetes, neuropathy, high blood pressure, and a heart that had apparently decided retirement meant doing the bare minimum. My mom had arthritis and enough prescriptions of her own that I could recognize her pill bottles by cap color from across the kitchen. So I immediately asked, "What happened?" Linda hesitated. That hesitation told me more than the words that followed. She said, "You haven't been helping anymore?" I stared through my windshield. "I haven't been helping." She said, "You stepped away when your dad got worse." Now, there are sentences that make you angry right away. Then there are sentences your brain rejects because they're so incompatible with reality that anger has to wait its turn. I said, "Linda, Dad got worse 6 years ago." "I know. I've been handling their prescriptions since then." Another pause. "Well, your mom made it sound like Nate has been doing all of that." Nate is my younger brother. He's 6 years younger than me, 40 at the time this happened, and has spent most of his adult life being described by my parents as someone who is still finding his footing, which is a remarkably durable phrase when applied to a man with a mortgage, 2 ex-fiancés. I asked Linda exactly what Mom had said. She tried to soften it. I told her not to. So she finally said, "Your mom told the prayer group that you abandoned them when they needed you most, and that Nate had to take over." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. It was the kind of laugh that comes out when reality has become too stupid for your normal emotional system. "Nate had to take over what?" I asked. Linda didn't know. Nobody did. That turned out to be the problem. My mother had given people a conclusion without any details, and because she was 71, my father was 74, and I was the adult daughter who had recently stopped showing up every Sunday morning with a bag full of prescriptions. People filled in the missing pieces themselves. Older parents. Sick father. Daughter disappears. Semanini. Loyal son steps in. Clean story. Tiny. Easy villain. I thanked Linda for telling me and went back to work because, unlike several members of my family, I have always considered employment a recurring obligation. But I didn't hear half of what my technician said that morning. I kept seeing the same image in my head. My mother sitting in that church basement, accepting sympathy for being abandoned, while 6 years of my life were apparently being reassigned to my brother, like somebody had changed the name on a file. What nobody in that prayer group knew was that I could tell you which pharmacy tech worked Tuesdays, which one usually worked Saturdays, which drive-through lane froze when the temperature dropped below 25, which of Dad's prescription that thermos had ridden in my cup holder through hundreds of pharmacy runs. Dad gave it to me when I was 18 because he said gas station coffee would bankrupt me. The paint was chipped around the bottom now, and the silver cap had one dent from when I dropped it outside an emergency room in 2021. I still used it. Some things stay with you because they're useful. Some things stay with you because you mistake usefulness for love. I was 46 when all of this happened, which is probably old enough to know the difference. I didn't. Not yet. Growing up, Nate and I had very different jobs in the family. So nobody officially assigned them. Families rarely do. You just notice eventually that one kid gets called when something needs fixing, and another gets called when there are free concert tickets. I was the first one. Nate was the second. When I was 16, Mom started saying, "Leah can handle it." Flat tire? Leah can handle it. Grandma needs groceries? Leah can handle it. Dad forgot an appointment? Leah can handle it. Nate needs a ride because he missed the bus? Leah can handle it. The phrase sounded like praise when I was young. Honestly, I was proud of it. I was good at handling things. Give me 3 conflicting schedules, a broken air conditioner, a missing part, 2 angry customers, and a technician stuck on Highway 169, and I'm weirdly happy. Problems make sense to me. There's an order to them. You figure out what failed, what still works, what's urgent, and what can wait. Families are harder because sometimes the broken part is the rule everyone insists is normal. Our family rule was, the one with room makes room. Mom said it constantly. If somebody had more money, they helped the person with less. If somebody had extra time, they gave it to the person who was overwhelmed. If somebody had a spare bedroom, they hosted. It sounded generous, beautiful, even. The problem was that somehow I always had room. I had room because I was single. I had room because I had a steady job. I had room because I didn't have kids. I had room because I was organized. I had room because Nate was stressed. I had room because Mom was tired. I had room because Dad didn't understand online banking. I had room because everyone had gotten so used to me making room that they stopped wondering what used to be there. The year Dad's health started sliding, I was 40. He'd been diabetic for years, but suddenly we were dealing with foot pain, medication changes, blood pressure problems, and one hospital stay that scared all of us more than anybody admitted. Mom hated driving at night. Nate lived 20 minutes away, but was launching what he described as a sales consulting company, which appeared to involve posting motivational quotes on LinkedIn and borrowing $12,000 from Dad. I lived 34 minutes away. Guess who became the default? It started small. One prescription, pickup. Then, another. Then Mom asked if I could start organizing Dad's medications because he kept mixing up the morning and evening pills. I bought one of those oversized weekly organizers and started filling it every Sunday. Then, I made a dry erase chart for the refrigerator. Then I added their appointments to my calendar. Oh. Then Mom had a flare-up with her arthritis. So I started picking up hers too. Then the pharmacy stopped automatically sensing refills, so I started calling. Then Dad's insurance changed. Then one medication suddenly cost $480 because the authorization hadn't gone through. I spent 47 minutes on the phone getting it corrected. I remember because I was sitting in my truck outside a customer's warehouse while doing it, and I missed lunch. Nobody forced me. I want to be clear about that. This is the part where people sometimes rewrite themselves as innocent martyrs, and I don't want to do that. I volunteered for plenty of it. I said yes before anyone finished asking. Shukurna, nabijachud orja chaks, and you. I'd built an entire identity around being the daughter who didn't create problems. My private belief, though I wouldn't have had the language for it then, was simple. If I stayed useful enough, they'd never have a reason not to value me. That belief had been very helpful when I was 12. It is considerably less helpful when you're 46. For the first year, Dad thanked me constantly. He'd hand me $20 for gas. Sometimes I'd take it. Usually, I wouldn't. Mom would hug me and say, "I don't know what we'd do without you." That sentence was catnip to me. I didn't hear the warning inside it. By year 2, the thank yous got less frequent because my help had become routine. By year 3, Sunday wasn't Leah coming to help. Sunday was simply when medications got done. By year 4, if I arrive at 10:15 instead of 10, Mom would call and ask where I was. That's how unpaid labor becomes invisible. First it's a favor, then it's appreciated, then it's expected. Then one day, you're late to your own obligation. I also started covering prescription copays whenever things were tight. Not all of them, but enough. Dad would sometimes reach for his wallet at the drive-thru, and I'd say, "I've got it." Or Mom would tell me their property tax was due, and I'd just put the $46 prescription on my card. Then, 72. Then, 118. One month their combined medication bill was $312 because of deductible timing. I paid it. Mom said she'd pay me back. I told her not to worry about it. Again. Nobody stole the money out of my hand. I volunteered. But volunteering only feels voluntary when no remains a safe answer. Nate, meanwhile, would show up in bursts. He'd take Dad to breakfast. He'd bring over ribs. He once spent an entire Saturday pressure washing their driveway, and Mom talked about it for 7 months. I'd been there the weekend before sorting 6 prescription bottles, changing 2 air filters, calling the insurance company, taking Mom to the grocery store, and cleaning out a freezer after a breaker trip. Nobody mentioned that at dinner. Nate had pressure washed the driveway. Apparently, we'd witnessed a miracle. I used to joke about it. Maybe I need to start pressure washing the medication, I told my friend Denise once. Denise is the office manager at my company and has known me 15 years, which means she's earned the right to tell me things I don't want to hear. She said, "You joke every time they hurt your feelings." I told her that was cheaper than therapy. She said, "For now." She wasn't wrong. The first time I really noticed how differently my parents described our contributions was at Dad's 70th birthday. Nate gave him a fishing reel that cost maybe $200. It was a nice gift. Dad loved it. At dinner, Mom toasted Nate and said, "You've always been there for your dad." I was sitting 2 chairs away after spending the previous morning at a cardiology appointment with Dad, and the previous afternoon arguing with a pharmacy benefits line. I waited. I actually waited for her to add something about me. She didn't. Oh, that sounds small. It was small. Most family patterns are. That's why they survive. If somebody steals your car, you know what happened. If somebody makes you invisible 1 teaspoon at a time, you spend years wondering if you're being dramatic. I told myself Mom was emotional. I told myself Nate had made an effort. I told myself it didn't matter because Dad knew. Then Dad looked at Nate and said, "Your mother's right. We can always count on you." I looked down at my plate. I remember there were green beans I didn't want, and a smear of mashed potatoes shaped like a crescent, because apparently your brain saves completely useless details when something hurts. I didn't say anything. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was continuing exactly as before. My third mistake was thinking silence prevented resentment. Silence doesn't prevent resentment. It just makes sure nobody else has to deal with yours. About 18 months later, Dad had another health scare. Not catastrophic, but enough that medication changes came fast. I started using a spreadsheet to keep track of refill dates, dosage changes, and which doctor prescribed what. That sounds excessive until you've watched two specialists give conflicting instructions and then both act surprised. Mom called my spreadsheet. Leah's commands sent her. She'd brag about it to nurses. But outside medical situations, the story was still that Nate was the family helper. Because Nate did visible things. I did infrastructure. Infrastructure is only interesting when it stops working. The incident that finally changed things happened on a Sunday in March. I arrived at my parents' house at 9:50 with the green thermos, a paper grocery bag, 4 prescription bottles, Mom's calcium supplements, Dad's test strips, and a box of cinnamon rolls because he'd asked for them, even though he was diabetic, and apparently Nate's truck was in the driveway. That was unusual. When I walked in, Mom and Nate were sitting at the kitchen table. Dad was in his recliner. There was a weird heaviness in the room, but my family specializes in pretending weird heaviness is weather. I said, "Morning, Dad." Mom said, "We need to talk to you." I put the pharmacy bag down. "Oh, eh." Nate leaned back in his chair like somebody had invited him to a board meeting he owned. Mom said, "Your brother's in a bind." I almost laughed because Nate had been in a bind since the Clinton administration. Apparently, his consulting business owed taxes, one of his clients hadn't paid, and he needed $14,000 to bridge things. I asked the obvious question. "Why are we talking about this?" Mom looked at me. "We thought you might help." $14,000? It would be a loan. Nate finally spoke. "I can pay you back in 6 months." I looked at him. "You still owe Dad 12 from the business." His jaw tightened. "That's different, is it?" Mom sighed my name in that exhausted tone parents use when they want you to understand that your boundaries are making everyone's day harder. "Oh, Leah." I knew that tone. It meant, "Don't make this a thing." I said, "I'm not lending $14,000. Dad shifted in his recliner. "You've got savings." That stung more than I expected. "Yes, because I save it," Mom said. "And Nate needs help." I stared at her. "Then you help him." She looked away. "We already have." "How much?" Nobody answered. That was when I knew it was more than 12,000. I asked again. Nate said, "Why does that matter? Because you're asking me for 14 and Mom said, "The one with room makes room." There it was. Our family commandment. I had heard that sentence 1,000 times. That morning, it sounded different. I looked at the pharmacy bag sitting beside me. "I make room every week." Mom's face changed immediately. Not guilty. Annoyed. "This isn't about the prescriptions, I know. I'm saying I already help." Nate snorted. Actually, snorted. Picking up some pills isn't exactly the same as helping somebody keep a business alive. I looked at him for probably 5 seconds. "Some pills? You know what I mean." "No. Explain it." Mom cut in. "Leah, don't start keeping score." That sentence did something to me. Because when one person benefits from an arrangement, records are called scorekeeping. When that same person needs something, suddenly everybody remembers the exact balance in your savings account. I said, "I'm not lending the money." Dad said, "Your brother would do it for you." I almost admired the confidence required to say something so unsupported by history. "Okay," I said. "Then, if I ever need $14,000, we'll find out." I filled the medication organizer. I updated the refrigerator chart. I put the cinnamon rolls on the counter. Then I left. Mom didn't hug me goodbye. 3 days later, she texted me, "I hope you're proud of yourself." I didn't answer. Sunday came. I still went over. Of course I did. Survival beliefs don't disappear because you have one uncomfortable conversation. They dig in. I picked up 3 prescriptions, paid $68.14, filled the organizer, and listened while Mom talked around me. The following Sunday, I went again. Then again. 2 months later, Nate still hadn't solved his tax problem, and apparently my refusal had become proof of a character defect. Mom started making little comments. Some people care more about money than family. Dad asked me why I needed so much sitting in the bank. Nate stopped responding to my texts unless he needed something. I tolerated it longer than I should have, because the actual caregiving still mattered. Dad needed his medication. Mom needed help. I kept separating their behavior from their needs, which sounds noble, until you realize I was also using their needs as a reason not to face their behavior. Then came my 46th birthday. Mom wanted to do dinner at a barbecue place in Broken Arrow. There were 8 of us. My parents, Nate and his girlfriend, my Aunt Teresa, Denise, and me. I nearly didn't invite Denise because I knew my family could be weird around outsiders. I'm glad I did. Halfway through dinner, Aunt Teresa asked Dad how he'd been feeling. Dad said, "Better now that Nathan's keeping an eye on us." Nathan. He gets the full name when my parents are proud. Teresa said, "That's good." Then Mom added, "We'd be lost without him." Denise looked at me. I kept eating. She knew. I knew she knew. Nate said, "I just do what needs doing." I almost choked on brisket. Mom nodded. "You've always been that way." I set down my fork. I didn't make a scene. I didn't expose anybody. I just asked one question. Who picked up Dad's insulin yesterday? Mom's eyes flicked toward me. What? Dad's insulin? Who picked it up? You did. Who paid for it? She looked annoyed. Leah, what is this? I'm asking. Dad said. You did? Who spent Monday on the phone with cardiology? Silence. Who filled the pill organizer Sunday? Mom said quietly. You did. I nodded. Okay. Nate leaned forward. Nobody said you don't do anything. I looked directly at him. You just said you do what needs doing. I do. Name 3 things you've done for their medical care this month. His face got red. I don't have to give you a list. No, you don't. Then Mom said, the sentence that ended something in me. Leah. Nathan helps in ways that matter, not more. Not differently, in ways that matter. Unhaktukai. I wish I could tell you I gave some perfect response. I didn't. I just sat there. Denise, later, said my face went completely blank. I looked at Mom and asked, do my ways not matter? You? Mom immediately backpedaled. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. Dad muttered. Come on. Let's enjoy dinner. There it was again. Keep everything smooth. Leah can handle it. Leah won't ruin dinner. So I didn't. I finished my birthday meal. I even split dessert with Teresa. Then I drove home and cried so hard in my driveway that I couldn't get out of the truck for 20 minutes. The green thermos was still in the cup holder from work. I remember staring at it and thinking about Dad handing it to me when I was 18. He'd said, "You're the one I never worry about." For years, I thought that was love. Sitting there at 46, I finally heard the other half. We never worry about you, because we assume you'll absorb whatever we give you. The next morning, I called Mom. I told her I wasn't going to manage the prescriptions anymore. Not forever, necessarily, but I needed to step back. She went silent. Then, because of dinner? Because of 6 years? You're being dramatic, maybe. Your father depends on you. Then you and Nate need to figure out a system. Nathan works. That actually made me laugh. So, do I? You know what I mean? I did. Nate's time was considered occupied because he had a life. Mine was considered available because I was competent. Mom said, "We can't just suddenly do all of this ourselves." I didn't suddenly start doing it. What is that supposed to mean? It means you had 6 years to notice. I offered to write out the refill schedule. I sent her the spreadsheet. I gave her phone numbers. I explained which prescriptions were automatic and which weren't. I even arranged 30-day refills so nothing would run out during the transition. I did not abandon anybody. I transferred responsibility back to 2 mentally competent adults and their 40-year-old son. Mom treated it like I'd put them on an iceberg. The first Sunday I didn't go over, she called at 9:15. "Shh. Are you coming?" "No. Dad's organizer is empty. The medication bottles are in the cabinet. I showed you how to fill it. I thought you were just angry." Angry. I'm also not coming." She hung up on me. At 11:30, Nate texted, "Seriously? You're making Mom cry? Over pills?" I replied, "You're there 20 minutes away." Huh. He said, "I've got plans." I stared at that message for a long time. Then, I screenshot it. Not because I was building a case. Not yet. I just wanted proof for myself that I wasn't imagining the insanity. Over the next month, my parents' house did not collapse. That matters. Mom learned the pharmacy app. Dad learned to refill his own organizer with her checking him. Nate picked up prescriptions twice and complained both times. A neighbor drove them to one appointment. They managed. What changed was that the system suddenly required everyone else to participate, and they hated that. Mom called Teresa and said I was going through something. Dad told a cousin I'd become very focused on myself. Nate told people I was punishing our parents because he and I had a disagreement about money. That version spread. By the time Linda called me from church, apparently I had abandoned my sick father over $14,000. Notice the trick. They included the money because it made me sound petty, but left out the part where I had been asked to provide it. I started getting messages. A cousin in Arkansas wrote, "Your parents aren't going to be around forever." An old family friend said, "Whatever happened with Nathan, don't take it out on your dad." Teresa called me and said, "I know this isn't what it sounds like, but your mom is telling everybody you just stopped helping." I asked, "Did she mention 6 years?" "No." "Did she mention the prescription schedule I gave her?" "No." "Did she mention that Nate said he was too busy to go over because he had plans?" Teresa got quiet. "No." Tora. That's when I made another mistake. I tried to correct the story privately. I called Mom. "You need to stop telling people I abandoned you." I never said abandoned. Linda used that exact word. Well, that's how it felt. Feeling abandoned and being abandoned are different. You left us to figure everything out. You're adults. She started crying. I hate when my mother cries. Even now. That's the annoying part of boundaries. Nobody puts on inspirational mugs. You can know somebody is manipulating you and still feel terrible when they hurt. Mom said, "After everything we've done for you." I nearly apologized. I actually opened my mouth to apologize. Then, I looked at the spreadsheet on my laptop. 6 years of dates. 6 years of reminders. 6 years of Sunday mornings. I said, "Mom, I'm not doing this." She hung up. Dad called 2 hours later. He said, "Your mother is devastated." I said, "Dad, Did I abandon you? He paused. You stopped coming. That's not what I asked. You know we relied on you. Did I abandon you? Another pause. It felt that way. I said, okay. That answer hurt more than Mom's because Dad knew. He knew every single Sunday. He knew I sat beside him in the emergency room. He knew I paid for prescriptions. He knew. But acknowledging that would require admitting the news story was false. And the false story was more convenient because it put me back in the role they needed. I stopped defending myself after that. Mostly. Some days, I was strong. Other days, I typed entire essays into my phone and deleted them. Denise caught me doing it at work once. Who are you arguing with? She asked. Nobody. That's a long message for nobody. I showed her. She read the first paragraph and handed my phone back. Don't send it. Why? Because people committed to misunderstanding you don't need more material. I hated that sentence because it was correct. About 3 months after I stepped back, Dad called. His tone was different. Businesslike. Done. We need you to come over Thursday. Why? I'm organizing medical expenses for the accountant. My parents itemize more things than I understand, and Dad had become convinced every receipt in America was potentially deductible. He said the pharmacy had printed a purchase history because he wanted a record of what they'd spent. Okay, I said. What do you need me for? There are charges we don't understand. Call the pharmacy. We did. Then call your accountant. He sighed. Leah, just come over. I almost said no. Then he added, some of these payments are yours. I sat up. What payments? That's why I'm asking you. Thursday at 6, I drove to their house for the first time in nearly 4 months. I brought the green thermos because I'd come straight from work, and apparently, my subconscious enjoys symbolism. Nate's truck was there. Aunt Teresa's car, too. I didn't know she'd been invited. When I walked into the kitchen, the first thing I noticed was the medication organizer on the counter. Mom had labeled morning and evening compartments with little strips of masking tape. Her handwriting, not mine. Something about seeing that almost broke me. Not because she'd replaced me. Because it proved she always could. Dad was sitting at the table with a thick stack of pharmacy printouts. Nate was across from him. Teresa stood near the sink. Mom said, we thought it would be easier if everyone was here. That sentence has never preceded anything easy. I sat down. Dad pushed the papers toward me. The pharmacy printed 6 years. I looked at the top sheet. It was a patient purchase history, grouped by year. Dates, prescription numbers, copays. The pharmacist had also reprinted a series of register receipts for larger transactions because Dad had asked about payment methods. I recognized the dates before I recognized the numbers. October 4th. That was the day I left work early because Dad's insulin authorization got rejected. December 22nd. Ice storm. I'd waited 40 minutes in the drive-thru. February 17th. Mom's arthritis medication. May 9th. Hush. The Sunday before Mother's Day. Line after line after line. Dad tapped a column. These showed different payment methods. I looked closer. The pharmacy history identified whether charges were cash or card, and the reprinted receipts showed the last 4 digits. 4,182. My card. 4,182. Again. And again. And again. Hundreds of dollars at first. Then, thousands over the years. Mom said quietly. We didn't realize you paid this many. I looked at her. How could you not realize? Sometimes you said you had it. Yes. We thought Dad paid you back. I turned to Dad. Did you? Dad looked confused. I gave Nathan money for prescriptions. Whoa. The room changed. Not dramatically. Nobody gasped. Nobody dropped a glass. Teresa stopped, drying a plate. Nate looked at Dad very quickly, and then looked away. I said, What? Dad repeated it. When you started handling everything, Nathan said it would be easier if we gave him the reimbursement money, and he'd settle up with you. I genuinely thought I'd misunderstood. Settle up with me, Nate said immediately. That's not exactly what happened. I turned toward him. Then, tell me exactly what happened. He rubbed his jaw. Dad would ask what they owed. And sometimes I gave him numbers based on what you told Mom. What numbers? Dad stood up, went into the living room, and came back with an old check register and a stack of bank statements. My father saves paperwork like civilization. May eventually be reconstructed from his filing cabinet. He opened the register. There. Die. A check to Nathan. $240. Another the next month for $300. Another for $175. Another for $400. And then she did the sack save Charles. I felt cold. What were these for? Dad said, prescriptions, groceries. Things you two were covering, you two? Nate jumped in. Some of it was groceries. Did you ever give me any of this money? I paid for things too. That isn't what I asked. Mom said, Leah, calm down. I looked at her. I am calm. That was true. Huh. My hands weren't even shaking yet. That came later. I asked Nate again. Did you ever give me the reimbursement money Dad gave you for prescriptions I paid for? Nate looked at Dad. Then Mom. Then me. Not directly. There are phrases guilty people use because the word no feels too dangerous. Not directly. I said, how indirectly? I bought meals. I helped with stuff. Teresa finally spoke. Nathan. Just his name. He snapped. What? She said. Answer her. Dad had started flipping through his register. Suddenly, the 6 years of pharmacy receipts weren't the story anymore. They were a map. Every date created a question. On September 12th, I'd paid $89.32. 4 days later, Dad wrote Nate a check for 150 marked meds. In November, I paid $204. Nate received $300. January, I paid $118. Nate received $250. It wasn't exact, which somehow made it worse. If he'd stolen exact amounts, at least there would have been a system. Instead, he'd been estimating what he could ask for. Dad said, I thought Leah was getting this. Nate said, you never asked. I laughed once. That's your defense. I didn't say it was a defense. You let them believe they were paying me back. I paid for plenty of other things. Name them. I'm not doing an audit with you. I looked down at the receipts again. 6 years. My card. My money. My Sundays. Their reimbursement. His pocket. Then something else occurred to me. Mom, when you told me not to keep score, did you know Dad was reimbursing Nate? She didn't answer fast enough. Mom, I knew your father gave him money sometimes. For things I paid for. I didn't know exactly. Did you think he was giving it to me? She looked at the table. That was the moment the story changed for me. Nate taking money was awful. But Nate being Nate was not exactly a shocking twist. He'd been irresponsible forever. What hit harder was realizing my parents had built an entire emotional economy around the assumption that I could afford to give, and Nate needed to receive. Mom finally said, "We knew you were doing well." I stared at her. What does that have to do with anything? Nathan's had a harder time. So, we didn't think you needed every little reimbursement. Every little reimbursement. Doubt. I looked at the stack. How much is this? Dad had started adding figures on a calculator. He said, "I don't know yet." Teresa took the calculator from him and began going through the register. I didn't help. For once in my life, I sat there while somebody else handled it. The total payments to Nate, labeled prescriptions, medical, groceries, or Leah, over 6 years came to $19,480. Not all of that was necessarily mine. Some was legitimately for groceries he bought or expenses he covered. We spent the next week comparing. Dad and Teresa did most of it because I refused to become project manager of my own exploitation. Eventually, we could directly connect a little over $11,000 to pharmacy purchases on my cards or other expenses I had personally covered. $11,000 wasn't enough to ruin my life. That almost made it more painful. My parents knew that too. You could afford it became their moral defense. The system wasn't that they believed I had done nothing. The system was that what I did stopped counting, because they had decided it cost me less to give than it cost Nate to go without. And once you believe one child is resilient and another is fragile, fairness starts looking cruel. Suddenly details from years earlier rearranged themselves. Why Mom always thanked Nate for handling finances. Why Dad once told me, "Your brother makes sure we're square." Why Nate never offered to split pharmacy costs even when he knew I was paying. And why my parents could sincerely believe Nate had been contributing more than he had. He wasn't just receiving their praise. He was receiving reimbursement for my work. I wasn't family. I was the family's invisible vendor. And vendors don't get thanked once the invoice disappears. Nate left the house that Thursday furious. Not ashamed. Furious. He said we were making him look like a criminal over family money. Dad said, "It wasn't your money." Nate shot back, "You gave it to me." That sentence landed. Because technically, he wasn't wrong about every dollar. Dad had handed him checks. Mom had tolerated it. Nate hadn't hacked an account. The ugliness was more ordinary. Everyone had made tiny decisions that benefited Nate, because everyone believed Leah would be fine. Nate called me the next morning. I almost didn't answer. "You happy?" he asked. "About what?" "Dad's acting like I robbed him." "Did you tell him the reimbursements were going to me?" I said I'd handle it. "Did you?" Silence. "I helped them in other ways." "Then why didn't you tell them the money wasn't going to me?" "Because you didn't need it." There it was. Same belief. Different mouth. "That wasn't your decision. You're sitting on savings." "Stop talking about my savings. This whole family has spent years treating you like you're one emergency away from bankruptcy." I actually had to pull the phone away from my ear. "No, Nate. This family spent years treating you like every inconvenience is an emergency." He said I was jealous. I told him that was lazy. He told me to go to hell. I said, "Okay," and hung up. 2 days later, Mom called and asked if we could talk alone. I went over. She had coffee ready, which is my mother's preferred method of beginning conversations she hopes won't require accountability. She said, "We owe you an apology." I waited. She said, "We should have paid closer attention." I waited again. "And Nathan shouldn't have kept money that was meant for you. Still nothing about telling everyone I abandoned them. So I asked, what about the church? She looked tired. I was upset. You told people I abandoned you. I said I felt abandoned. You let them believe I disappeared after Dad got sick. I didn't give them a timeline. Exactly. She rubbed her forehead. What do you want me to do, Leah? Stand up Sunday morning and make an announcement. You managed to tell them the first version. She flinched. I hated that I enjoyed seeing it land. That's another uncomfortable truth. Boundaries can be healthy, while parts of you are still petty. Mom said, I'll correct it. How? If it comes up. No. What do you mean no? I mean you didn't wait for it to come up when you told people I abandoned you. I want you to call Linda. I want you to call Linda. Mom's mouth tightened. That makes us sound terrible. I almost laughed. Do you hear yourself? She looked down. Family business doesn't need to be everybody's business. It became everybody's business when I became everybody's villain. She didn't agree that day. Instead, she offered something I had wanted for years. Recognition, she said. Your father and I have talked. We're changing the estate plan. I stared at her. What does that have to do with this? We've always planned to split everything evenly, but given how much you've done, we think the house should go to you. For one terrible second, I wanted it. Not because of the house. Their house was a modest 3-bedroom place, built in the late 80s. I didn't need it. I wanted what the offer represented. Proof. Finally, permanent proof that they saw what I had done. Mom continued, but we need to put this behind us. Your dad can't handle all this stress. Nathan is still your brother. We'll deal with the money privately. You come back Sundays, help us get things stable again, and we stop tearing the family apart. There was the poisoned offer. Everything I'd wanted wrapped around the same old job. Recognition, but only if I resumed service. Reward, but only if I stayed quiet. Love, with a task list attached. I sat at the table for maybe a full minute. Mom mistook my silence for negotiation. The house will be worth more than anything you spent. I said, that's the problem. What? You still think this is about reimbursement, isn't it? I shook my head. No, I could lose every receipt and it would still be the same problem. Then what do you want? I looked at her. I want you to tell the truth when it costs you something. Mom started crying. Quietly this time. Not performatively. I think she really was scared. Scared of embarrassment. Scared Nate would pull away. Scared Dad's health would worsen. Scared the family would split. And for the first time, I could understand her fear without immediately volunteering to solve it. She said, I was raised to believe family problems stay inside the family. Then why did you tell the prayer group I abandoned you? She had no answer. That question did more than any speech could have. Mom did eventually make the calls. Not all at once. Not perfectly. Linda called me 2 weeks later and said, Your mother told us you'd been handling their medications for years. I said, Did she tell you why I stopped? Linda sighed. She said, There had been some family issues. I laughed. Of course she did. But then Linda added, She also said she shouldn't have used the word abandoned. That mattered. More than I expected. Dad called my cousin in Arkansas himself. Teresa made sure of it. Nate refused to apologize for months. Dad asked him to repay the portion of reimbursements we could directly document as mine. Nate said he didn't have $11,000. That was believable. They worked out a payment plan. I told Dad I didn't want the money routed through him. If Nate wanted to repay me, he could send it directly. For the first 4 months, he did. Then, he missed one. Then, another. Old patterns don't collapse just because everybody finally names them. Dad almost covered the missed payments. I told him not to. Then you won't get paid. Maybe not. That doesn't make sense. It makes perfect sense. If you cover him, nothing changed. Dad hated that. So did I. I wanted the money. But I wanted the system to stop more. Nate eventually sold the base boat. I'm not kidding. The base boat my parents had spent years pretending wasn't evidence of anything became partial repayment for medication he had never purchased. The irony was almost too neat, which is why I didn't even comment when he told me. I just said, okay. Over the next year, Nate and I barely spoke. Then Dad ended up in the hospital again. My first instinct was to take over. I was halfway to my parents' house before I realized what I was doing. I pulled into a gas station and sat there. Old survival beliefs are sneaky. They don't leave dramatically. They wait until you're scared and then offer themselves as a solution. If I stay useful, I belong. I called Mom. What do you need? She said, I don't know. Old Leah would have said, I'll handle it. Instead, I asked, what has the doctor said? She told me. I asked if she wanted me at the hospital. Yes. So, I went. Not because nobody else could. Because she asked. Nate came too. He arrived 40 minutes after me, carrying coffee. For once, nobody praised him for discovering beverages. Dad was okay. Medication adjustment, observation, home 2 days later. 2 days later. While we were in his room, a nurse asked who managed his prescriptions. Mom said, we do. Then she looked at me and added, Leah taught us the system. It was one sentence. Nobody else would have heard anything special. I did. I also noticed Nate heard it. He looked down at his coffee. Months later, he asked if we could meet. We went to a diner halfway between our houses. I expected defensiveness. I got some. He said, I still think everyone blew the money thing way out of proportion. I said, then why are we here? He stared at his menu. Because I knew. Knew what? That they thought you were getting paid back. That was the closest he'd come to admitting it plainly. I didn't rescue him. He continued. At first I thought I'd square it up later. Then I needed the money. Then it got weird. It was weird the first time. Yeah? He rubbed the edge of the menu with his thumb. I know. Then he said something I genuinely didn't expect. You know what sucked growing up? I nearly laughed. This should be good. Everybody thought you were better than me. Mom and Dad absolutely did not. Not better like favorite. Better like capable. They trusted you with everything. Dad talked to you like an adult when you were 17. I was 25 and he still called the mechanic for me. That stopped me. Nate continued. I hated it. But I also used it. If you were the one who could handle everything, then I never had to become that guy. There it was. Damnation. Not absolution, but explanation. I said. And Mom and Dad kept rescuing you. Yeah. And I kept making that possible. He looked at me. Yeah. Tanyal Daddy, Darnlane share, I walk whole, undernamed Percy. That one hurt, because it was true. Every time I covered what Nate didn't do, I had helped preserve the exact system I resented. Not because I caused it, but because usefulness was how I earned my place. Nate said, I'm sorry. No speech. No tears. Just that. I asked, for what? because apologies deserve nouns. He sighed. For keeping money that was supposed to go to you, for letting them think I was doing more than I was, and for what I said at your birthday. Which part? The pills thing? I nodded. Okay. Does that mean you forgive me? I don't know yet. He gave a small laugh. Fair. Talk, too. That was the beginning of limited contact. Not some movie reconciliation. I don't give him access to my accounts. I don't loan him money. I don't cover for him. We have dinner maybe every couple months. Sometimes he annoys me. Sometimes I annoy him. He has held a steady job now for nearly a year and a half, which I mention because growth deserves accuracy too. Mom and Dad are different, but not transform. Mom still occasionally says things like, "It would be easier if you just," and then catches herself. Dad now uses the pharmacy app himself. He's weirdly proud of it. He once showed me how to request a refill, as though he'd personally invented digital medicine. I let him have the moment. The house never went to me. I told them to split the estate however they actually wanted. No rewards for caregiving. No punishment for boundaries. Just make the decision and own it. Dad repaid me for a portion of the pharmacy expenses out of his own savings despite my objections. I accepted some, not all. The money was never the clean ending people imagine. What mattered more was the stack of pharmacy receipts. For months, Dad kept them clipped together in a drawer. The last time I saw them, I asked why. He said, "Reminder." I asked, "Of what?" He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "That being quiet about what somebody does doesn't mean it didn't happen." Dad was never a speech guy. That was basically Shakespeare from him. A year after Linda called me, Mom invited me to the church Christmas dinner. I almost said no because I still felt embarrassed around those people, even though logically I knew I hadn't done anything embarrassing. Shame is annoying like that. It hangs around after the facts have changed. I went. Linda hugged me. Nobody interrogated me. Nobody demanded the whole story. One woman I barely knew said, "Your mom talks about how much you helped your dad." I smiled and said, "We all help differently." The second the words came out, I almost laughed. It sounded dangerously close to the old family propaganda. So I added, "These days we just make sure everybody knows which part is theirs." She didn't understand. I did. On the way home, I stopped for gas. It was cold, maybe 32 degrees, and I poured the last of my coffee from Dad's old green thermos. The paint was even more chipped by then. I realized that for years, that thermos had mostly gone from my house to work to my parents' pharmacy to their kitchen and back again. Same route, bus. Sunday after Sunday. I had started thinking of it as part of the caregiving routine. That weekend, I washed it, filled it the next morning, and drove 3 hours east to a cabin near the Arkansas line with Denise. No emergency. No prescription pickup. No appointment. Nobody needed anything. We hiked badly, ate overpriced burgers, and spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to start a fire with damp wood. At one point, Denise looked at the thermos and said, "Isn't that your dad's?" I said, "He gave it to me." She smiled. "There's a difference." She was right. There is a difference between something belonging to you and something you've been trained to carry for other people. It took me 46 years, 6 years of pharmacy runs, 1 birthday dinner, $11,000, a church prayer group, and a stack of receipts to understand that. My parents didn't lose me because I stopped loving them. I stopped disappearing inside the ways I loved them. And the strange thing is, once I stopped doing everything for my family, I finally found out which parts of being family were actually ours to share.